So obviously, big story was the student debt cancellation that Biden engaged in, the small amounts of student debt cancellation. I have a whole lot of things to say about this, you guys, from the policy of it to the politics of it to, kind of all angles of it. Um, you know, I do want to actually start here with a tweet that I think does a good job of giving some flowers where they are due. This is Barbarism Critic, who says it's not enough, leaves way too many people out, and we have to push for more, but activists deserve their flowers today. This never would have happened. 20 million people would not have had their debt wiped out if activists weren't relentless fighters on this subject. You guys, I want to remind you the White House spent a year and a half lying to us, saying that they could not do this, and the obvious reason for them doing that, especially looking back in hindsight, having their lies proven by themselves to have been lies, I think that it's important to recognize that the relentless pressure referenced in that tweet is obviously what got anything done here, right? So obviously, we're going to get into how inadequate it is and how stupid politically it is to only do this minuscule measure when you could go all the way and you have no reason not to. But I do want to give props to the activists who refused to shut up when the Democrats spent a year and a half brazenly lying to you, telling you that we can't do this without Congress. So we'll start there, and now we'll kind of get into some of the policy specifics. I have an article here in the Intercept that goes into the origin of student debt, which obviously has some. It's very revealing in terms of what student debt has evolved to become. This is by John Schwarz. The origin of student debt. Reagan advisor warned free college would create a dangerous, educated proletariat. In 1970, Roger Freeman, who also worked for Nixon, revealed the right's motivation for coming decades of attacks on higher education. With the vociferous debate about Joe Biden's announcement that the federal government will cancel a portion of outstanding student debt, it's important to understand how Americans came to owe the current cumulative total of more than $1.6 trillion for higher education. In 1970, Ronald Reagan was running for re-election as governor of California. He had first won in 1966 with confrontational rhetoric toward the University of California public college system and executed confrontational policies when in office. In May 1970, Reagan had shut down all 28 UC and Cal State campuses in the midst of student protests against the Vietnam War and the U.S. bombing of Cambodia. On October 29th, less than a week before the election, his education advisor Roger Freeman spoke at a press conference to defend him. Freeman's remarks were reported the next day in the San Francisco Chronicle under the headline, "Professor Sees Peril in Education." According to the Chronicle article, Freeman said, quote, "We are in danger of producing an educated proletariat. That's dynamite. We have to be selective on who we allow to go to college. If not," Freeman continued, "we will have a large number of highly trained and unemployed people," Freeman also said, taking a highly idiosyncratic perspective on the cause of fascism. Quote, "That's what happened in Germany. I saw it happen." Okay. I'm not even going to dignify the last point with a response. Obviously, overeducation is not the cause of fascism. What an absolutely moronic and absurd thing to say. But the reasons given there by Freeman for the initial classist policies on secondary education are, really do kind of elucidate the actual feelings of the elites and the actual root of the policy that we have now had to live under for decades, why it was actually there and what it was intended to do. Well, it succeeded in that regard, didn't it? Certainly constrained access to education to the wealthy, and the only way around that for so many people was to saddle themselves with crippling debt. And now the conservatives, the same conservatives who would have supported this policy, are now arguing against canceling or forgiving that debt for obviously the same reasons. I want to show you guys a couple clips here. This is Briahna Joy Grey. I'm sure many of you know her. She was Bernie's press secretary. She now does the Bad Faith podcast. And she also sometimes hosts Rising on the Hill. She did a couple of monologues on this, and I want to show you small portions of each. I just think she kind of makes the case very clearly and responds to some of the very disingenuous criticisms that we tend to see coming from the right against canceling student debt. So this is Briahna Joy Grey on the Hill talking about student debt.
Only has the executive authority to cancel one type of debt. I wish it weren't the case, but that's true. He can only cancel student debt right now. And running cover for the Biden administration and the big banks who pay him doesn't make you a working class hero. Hold the Springsteen tracks. Running cover for the senator from MBNA is the most elite of elite behavior, no matter how much you want to dress it up as a working class issue. The only question you have to ask yourself is this. A rich person and a poor person each have a child with great grades and an interest in being a doctor or a nurse or a teacher. Should the ability of the student and their interest drive whether they get to go to college or go on to medical school? Or should their parents' income determine that? Rich gatekeepers are paying millions of dollars to make sure America's students aren't bailed out, but Kanye, Kushner, and Paul Pelosi are. It's corruption, plain and simple. And with your help, it looks like elites are going to get away with it again.
Something to quibble with. I'm not sure that this policy is as popular as you're making it out to be. It matters how it's asked. Like I just Googled it, and so 59% of Americans are worried student loan forgiveness will make inflation worse, for instance, which I wonder why they think that, Robbie. Because it probably will make inflation
worse. All right,
worse.
So where was this conversation in these polls when the PPP loans were being forgiven without fanfare earlier this year?
Yeah, we shouldn't. I don't want to forgive any of those other things either. Look, I take your point on the bailouts. It's hypocritical. I agree with you on all that. All of these wealthy people seek bailouts and
get bailouts.
And they get them. So yes, I get that. Look, I feel badly for young people who took on this debt. It was a really bad idea.
Old people.
And nobody made them do it, though.
No, but Robbie,
you make an agreement.
That's not true, Robbie. The government, and you maybe are a little too young to remember this, but in the 80s, 90s, and early aughts, right up through Barack Obama, the rhetoric was clear. If you are poor, if you are from an underadvantaged community, if you are black, if you are brown, if you have low educational attainment, it's your fault. It's not the government's fault. You need to go to college.
So wonderful job of making the case there, and a perfect response to Robbie's nonsense. And I couldn't help but cackle a little bit at her. You might be too young to remember, and then the look on his face, that was hilarious. Great job from Briahna. But yeah, of course, you guys. I was part of the generation that was essentially raised being told by absolutely every authority figure that I ever interacted with, you need to go to college. That's the key to success. If you want to be able to sustain yourself economically, you need to go to college. This is what an entire, more than an entire generation has been told. So you can't turn around and say, well, you accepted the debt, and you can't turn around and complain that it's predatory now. I think that's an absurd argument on the surface. You can't just tell people you must do X to succeed and then blame them for doing X. I think it's absurd. And a great job there of shutting down that argument from Briahna. And also, I just want to note there's a little bit of a trend here. When you do good policy, you sometimes force conservatives into accidentally agreeing with good policy. And I have seen a number of conservatives say, well, actually, I think the PPP loan forgiveness was a bad thing. So you back them into a corner with these hypocrisies, and sometimes they will actually concede certain points. You got Marco Rubio going on cable news arguing for we need to fix the root of the problem, the predatory loans and the for-profit system for college. Marco fucking Rubio. So he's doing that as a criticism of Biden not fixing the root of the problem and putting a Band-Aid on it instead. Okay, Marco, I actually agree with you for once, but notice how you've been treated. You've basically become a puppet for the left because there's actually good policy being implemented here. So one nice byproduct of actually doing good things that help working class people is you sometimes force your enemy into a corner in other aspects of that policy, if that kind of makes sense. If I feel like I said that really shittily, but I hope you guys kind of know what I mean. And that becomes a little bit of a trend as we look at this student debt thing. Anyway, we have one more clip here of Briahna Joy Grey, and then we will come back and discuss. Oh, here we go.
COVID relief unexpectedly empowered labor, and now elites are trying to put a lid on it in whatever way they can, restarting student loan payments, canceling support for families with children, and intentionally driving up unemployment. We need to recognize this and use the student debt victory to continue to pull together as a community of working people and keep demanding more. In the richest country in the history of the world, education should be free. Yes, even for rich kids, just like public high school is free for the rich should they choose to attend. And I gotta say, I think rich people would be better people if they did attend public high schools. And just like libraries are free for the rich and services of firefighters, it's our country and we get to make it work for us. Let's follow through on legitimate concerns that student debt relief is only a partial solution and finish the job. Let's make America great again by establishing a well-educated, able workforce, one we can be proud of, one that can build semiconductors and make doctors and plumbers and invent medicines and fix our roads and bridges and create clean energy solutions, one that can compete on a global stage without relying on the power of American imperialism. I truly believe we can do all that, and I believe that free public college is a solid first step. So what do you think, Robbie? Have I addressed some of your concerns that you raised yesterday?
Look, I appreciate the point you made in the middle of your radar that and that you support changes to the system, because that's really where I'm coming from. I don't understand how this can be done with, and I listened to Biden's remarks yesterday where he talks about how he speaks eloquently about how people are mired in this debt. They're drowning. They were swindled. They were scammed. They can't get out of it. Okay, fine. But how can we do this then without fixing any of the underlying incentives that, like, shouldn't we end the scam? The scam being this subsidized student loan process that the government, it's a government policy. The government could just end it.
Yeah.
If it's so vicious, if it's such a swindle, we should stop doing the swindle.
You guys see what I mean? Briahna's sitting there going, yeah, I agree. I think sometimes you can back them into a corner when you simply execute good policy. They're arguing for a more progressive policy than Joe Biden actually went with here. So, and obviously there are all sorts of, I think, political issues with how that plays. There's the obvious sort of like on the surface take that it's positive politically because you are helping tens of millions of people in a pretty direct, tangible way. But there's a couple of other takes for me, and perhaps this is a little bit too sophisticated for a large portion of the voting public, and I don't mean that quite as condescendingly as it might have come off, but I think people tend to look at the surface level stuff and not go a little deeper. But Democrats basically admitted they were lying for a year and a half by doing this, right? So there's part of this that's kind of like, so wait a minute, what's been the story for a year and a half? Why didn't you just do this earlier? And the other thing is, I think the timing of it to most people will probably, at least to me, it seems very obviously aimed at helping them in the primaries. So instead of doing this right off the bat, and then maybe the sort of the excitement and the media coverage and this and that and the positive feelings for Democrats from this policy wears off, right? Instead, they choose to do it right before the primary. I think there's some political cynicism there that, is pretty easy to recognize. So I think there are a couple of ways in which this policy, does kind of backfire if you think it through. But I think on the by and large, you're like directly improving the financial situation for tens of millions of people, and that hardly can help you or hardly can hurt you in an election in most cases. The other thing, though, you guys, by doing 10 and 20 and this sort of means-tested, very convoluted bill that they decided to go with, or executive order that they decided to go with, it also reveals that you could have just canceled it all. Because the only reason you have refused thus far to cancel it all is you said you couldn't do what you've just done. So it also reveals not just that you've been lying for a year and a half, but that you could have done substantially more and chose not to, right? There's no one the Democrats can hide behind when they've done a portion of this. They can't say, well, the parliamentarian, or, well, we'd have to go through Congress and Joe Manchin, and, so if you go the layer deeper, I think there are a number of ways in which voters might find this kind of distasteful just in the specifics. But on the by and large, of course, you guys, forgiving debt for tens of millions of people is going to help you in an election, and I think that's probably what drove the timing of this. So all sorts of political implications here. It looks like I've been getting up here. Anyone who's listened to me regularly for the last year and however long I've been here at RP, I've been predicting, as I think was kind of universally expected, that the Republicans would absolutely mollywop the Democrats this November. That's looking more and more in doubt based upon some of the results that we've seen thus far. I still think it's a pretty favorable environment for Republicans, but I think that the Dobbs decision will backfire substantially on Republicans and might have handed Democrats a gift. And I think this student debt thing is obviously timed such that that Democrats are trying to benefit from it in a political sense. And also the Inflation Reduction Act, as it's fucking called, which really is not a good bill at all. It's maybe marginally reducing emissions, maybe. But I think the timing of that, because so many people base their political analysis on sort of how the media presents it, I think the timing of that is also kind of, driven towards helping the Democrats in the primary. A lot of people in D.C. seem to think that just passing anything is like a political win, and that'll get you media credit, and that'll make voters think that you can get things done to avoid the situation that looked pretty obvious for a long time, which was that they were going to get destroyed this November. So there's all sorts of political implications to this, obviously, you guys. You also kind of piss off the people that are making, $126 a year or whatever, right? Not that that's a very large portion of the voting public that's kind of right there on the margin. But when you means test something, you piss people off who are right over that margin and otherwise would have seen some forgiveness. I will say, I think that even more important than the 10 or 20,000, I think that the caps on payment are a step in the right direction. Instead of having to pay 10% of your monthly income for a graduate degree loan, you now have to pay 5%. That is pretty substantial for a lot of people, and obviously, I want to be very clear. I'm for canceling all of it, and all of this is inadequate in that context. But that is an important one, and also the 10-year cap on how long you have to pay loans. Previously, to my understanding, was 20. So there's marginal improvements here. This is what Democrats do, you guys. When they have power to do a good thing, they do like 10% of the good thing, and then they expect to be given credit for it. So I am thrilled for the tens of millions of people who will see substantial relief from this. I really sincerely am. I would rather see that happen than not. I'm glad to see those caps happen as opposed to them not. But it's obvious that the Democrats had the power to do substantially more here and chose not to. And I think that we also need to continue the pressure that has forced their hand this far, right? So again, props to the activists who would not shut up about this and kept this a prominent issue even as the Biden administration and other Democrats tried to tell us that we couldn't get it. And I hope that pressure will continue. Now, there is obviously also the economics of this, which have been grossly misrepresented by many different political factions, in my opinion. I have a couple of things to show you guys about. Oops. Here we go. A couple of things to show you guys about that. This is Ramona Masacci. Some of you may recognize her. She did some interviews with me of people running for Congress. Go give her a follow at Ramona Masacci if you're not following her. She says, the best thing that happened yesterday was not just getting some student loans canceled. It was everyone starting to question, where does money come from? How does the federal government create a policy that doesn't fall on the taxpayers' shoulders? This would be a good time for Bernie Sanders and friends to have an online discussion with Stephanie Kelton nationally about the taxpayer myth. Maybe John Yarmuth could lead it since he has nothing to lose. For those that don't know what she's referencing there, John Yarmuth is a member of the House who was chair of the Budget Committee and is retiring. So there's really no more threat the establishment can hold over his head. He came out publicly on C-SPAN and talked about MMT and encouraged people to read Stephanie's book. If you have not read The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton, I really recommend it. I also, once again, recommend realprogressives.org. We have all sorts of material on MMT. It's really important to understand how the federal finance system works, and I think Ramona is spot on there, that this did spark that discussion and that question of, well, who paid for the canceled debt? So obviously it's already on the ledger as it is, right? But these were federal loans, so that is public money that paid for those loans to start with, and now we're canceling them. If you don't understand where public money comes from, please, again, The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton and realprogressives.org for all sorts of MMT content. It's really important to understand that money is created when spent and eliminated when taxed. It is not the other way around. A lot of people seem to think that your hard-earned tax dollars are paying for things at the federal level. They are not in a functional sense. There are all sorts of reasons to tax, but none of them have anything to do with financing your spending at the federal level. And I think I agree with Ramona. I think it's very important that conversation be had, and I hope that policies like this continue to spark that conversation. To get into some of the specifics that I kind of started to dabble into there a little bit, this is from our founder and CEO, Steve. If you're not following him, at SD Grumbine on Twitter. For anyone looking at where does the money come from on the minuscule student debt point shaving experiment, no money was created. The institutions were already paid. A government-backed debt was simply no longer pursued for $10,000, nothing more than a ledger entry, negative $10,000. The federal government held the debt. However, we know your hero POTUS, he obviously means that facetiously, made discharging student debt through bankruptcy impossible, and he also made regular bankruptcy more challenging for people to discharge as well. That is very different than medical debt, which can be discharged. So what happens when folks come demanding reparations? Did folks learn about how federal finance works? Do they understand how to fight for their cause? How about national improved Medicare for all? Did anyone actually address the funding mechanism so people get it? It seems like the funding mechanism should be thoroughly understood so that this shitty pittance of a $10,000 debt cancellation is a total waste and can help discharge the remaining massive debt burden still hung on the necks of millions of people guilty of pursuing an education. Without a thorough understanding that the federal government is the currency issuer and therefore has the power to do anything whatsoever, it has the ability to purchase in U.S. dollars, and the available resources are available for purchase, either public purchase or private. For too long, we skip this part, and the main outcry, other than fairness, is people are concerned they are paying taxes to cover someone else's education. This simply isn't how it works. Federal taxes do not fund federal spending. There is only public money, never taxpayer dollars. So I think this does create a very nice opportunity for us to kind of make our pitch as to why MMT is so fucking important. You guys, you've all been out there and seen the arguments coming from the right? They're all trying to say, like, listen, your average middle class, working class person is having to pay taxes for the elite who went to college. You see these arguments, right? And we know they're disingenuous for a myriad of reasons. Many people do point out the hypocrisies there. Many people point out that the wealthiest of the wealthy obviously do not have to take out loans to go to college. Why would you take out a loan and pay interest when you could just cover it up front, you guys? The wealthy, the uber wealthy don't have these loans. There are a myriad of hypocrisies that we could point out. But one of them is that they are simply functionally incorrect. Those working class people are not paying for the cancellation of this debt in any sense at all. It's the public. It's the federal government. It is not your hard-earned tax dollars. That argument goes out the window the moment that we all understand MMT, and that is why it is so important, you guys. You can pick your policy. Pick a handful of them that are most important to you, as I presume mostly lefties in my audience. Pick a handful of them and list them in your head. All of them likely require some form of spending, right? What's the only effective argument against the policies you're thinking of? How are you going to pay for it? This is why it's so important for the public to understand MMT. It would totally disarm the right from their thoroughly disingenuous arguments about pay-fors, okay? So great thread there from Steve, and a great point from Ramona that this is a positive outcome of these kinds of policies. And, that's very important to understand the MMT stuff. Another hypocrisy here that we're going to get into a little bit, this is a tweet thread from Dean Baker. This one also got some coverage, and I'm sure many of you know a little bit about this. We actually talked a little bit about this last week. He says, fun with numbers. For those upset that Biden's loan forgiveness helps some better off people, let's think about what Senator Sinema did for boys and girls who run hedge funds. Let's say that the hedge fund partners may get paid $2.5 million. That takes the form of carried interest. If we didn't give special tax treatment for hedge fund and private equity partners, everything over $520,000 would be taxed at a 37% rate. Thanks to Senator Sinema's hard work, their pay is only taxed at the 20% capital gains rate. Taxed at the normal rate, the 37% on everything over $500,000 would mean roughly $740,000 in taxes. However, Senator Sinema's special treatment for hedge fund and private equity partners measure means they will only pay $400,000 in taxes. That's $340K in savings. The difference is $340K, or 34 times the student loan debt forgiveness that has gotten the pundits up in arms about helping better off people. And this tax giveaway to the private equity and hedge fund partners is an annual occurrence, not a one-time deal. Also, many of them would have far more than $2.5 million of their salary in carried interest. So, obviously, we covered the Inflation Reduction Act, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, and how Sinema and Manchin were able to slip in their goodies for the fossil fuel industry and for private equity. Dean doing a great job there to bring attention to the massive hypocrisy in the press, hand-wringing about $10K in cancellation for some better off people, which, by the way, you guys, I don't remember if I brought this up. I don't think I did. Damn it. I meant to. First of all, 40% of people who have student debt did not get their degree. It is not an elite group when we're talking about student debtors. And the second point is, and I really wish I brought this article up so I could cite it for you guys, but 90% of student debt is held by people who make $75,000 a year or less. So no, it's not the wealthy elites who are being forgiven here on the by and large. And obviously, when we're talking about public policy, like Briahna mentioned in one of those clips, this is like public high school, you guys. I don't want a billionaire's kid not to have access to public high school. And as Briahna points out, maybe some of their kids would be better fucking people if they went to public high school. So the separation between middle school and high school and then college has always been very odd and very arbitrary to me. We accept that these public institutions should service the entire general public up until you're 18. It's just it's arbitrary and it's odd. Do we value education or do we not? It's really that simple. Now, of course, you can make the argument that public school has been supported more because it provides essential daycare for parents who capitalists need to be at work. And I think there's probably some validity to that argument that once they're 18, the capitalists say, kick them to the streets and come into work. We no longer have any interest in this, right? But from a public policy perspective, it's always seemed odd to me that we just sort of, college is different. College is different, right? And of course, you guys, it's massively hypocritical for conservatives of all people who have dedicated their entire careers to serving these wealthy people to turn around and try to say, well, your policy helps the wealthy. Excuse me? Excuse me? I mean, that part's, so again, hypocrisy is just fucking all over the place here. Another angle in all of this that I wanted to make sure to draw to your attention, this is Nina Turner. She tweets, canceling $10,000 in student debt when the average white borrower is $12,000 in debt and black women hold an average over $52,000 isn't just unacceptable, it's structural racism. Obviously, as with many aspects of our society, there are racial discrepancies in terms of how badly this system harms different groups of people. Black women averaging over $52,000 in debt, you guys. So 10, even if they're Pell recipients and they get 20, for many people, the number that they owe goes up, not down, even when they're making payments because of the compounding interest. So for a lot of these people, 10 or 20 is it's not materially changing your financial situation. Certainly not for the near future. So I think that's worth pointing out, and that's an angle to all of this as well. We have a tweet here from the Gravel Institute. I'm sure some of you have seen the absurdity that Jason Furman has decided to spew all over online for the ever since this passed. He says pouring roughly $500 billion of gasoline on the inflationary fire that is already burning is reckless. Doing it while going well beyond one campaign promise, 10,000 of student loan relief, and breaking another, all proposals paid for, is even worse. Gravel Institute handles this quite nicely. They say this was Obama's chief economic advisor, in case you're wondering why the post-2008 recovery was such a disaster. That kind of sums it up. The economists have revealed themselves and told on themselves in response to this policy, you guys. The same people who have nothing to say about corporate price gouging and market manipulation seem to think that everyone needs to be saddled. Again, 90% of whom are making less than $75,000 a year. They need to be saddled with crippling debt for the economy, for the sake of avoiding inflation. But we're going to ignore the primary causes of inflation. Once again, a reason that it's very important to have at least a rudimentary understanding of macroeconomics. And we also have Jim Banks here, who just completely, said the quiet part out loud about one of the main reasons that the establishment has pushed back against free college and loan forgiveness. Jim Banks says, student loan forgiveness undermines one of our military's greatest recruitment tools at a time of dangerously low enlistments. We can't exploit poor kids into getting limbs blown off and coming back with PTSD anymore because you're offering them an education. Can you even imagine making that argument? Can you even, honestly, how do you lay your head on the pillow at night, Jim? Utterly absurd. We'd like for you to go commit war crimes, but we no longer have the leverage to exploit you into going and committing war crimes on behalf of imperialism and the military-industrial complex. So we can't make college free. We can't forgive this debt. Can you even imagine? But saying the quiet part out loud, and that obviously is, you guys, a serious pressure in terms of the establishment's thought process on this policy. So. And lastly, at least lastly on student debt anyway, I often, think that the Biden administration has been, and really Democrats for decades, have been historically bad communicators and really, really bad about selling policies and responding to criticisms. They always go all tepid and they always are on the defense. They never seem to go on the attack. So just purely from a political strategy kind of point of view, I have been kind of impressed by how they've responded to the Republicans on this. And I wanted to show you guys this thread. This is the right way to respond to hypocrisies and disingenuous criticism. Marjorie Taylor Greene says, for our government just to say, okay, your debt is completely forgiven, it's completely unfair. The White House retweets this and says, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene had $183,504 in PPP loans forgiven. Here we have Vern Buchanan. They say Congressman Vern Buchanan had over $2.3 million in PPP loans forgiven. Marquane Mullen, Congressman, Marquane Mullen had over $1.4 million in PPP loans forgiven. Kevin Hearn had over $1 million in PPP loans forgiven. Mike Kelly, $987,237 in PPP loans forgiven. Matt Gaetz, $482,000 forgiven. That is, you guys, how to respond. The Democrats are often far too tepid to go on the offense and, call out the hypocrisies that Republicans embrace. So, lots to condemn about this policy. I simply do not understand not just canceling all of it. I do not understand any arguments against that. Obviously, I do agree with the conservative pushback in the sense that, yeah, we should solve the root problems. We should make college free, and we should disallow predatory financial institutions from trying to profit off of it and trying to saddle, 18-year-olds with lifelong debt. Of course we should fix those problems. 100% agree. So there's a lot of issues with this bill. It doesn't go nearly far enough, but I do sincerely want to give props to the activists who pushed to make this much happen. I hope that we will continue to push. Not that I expect any more to come, but this is good for tens of millions of people, and I am grateful that those people have a financially better situation today than they did a week ago.